now.
Okay, well, good evening, everyone from London, and welcome to another Harif Zoom event. Harif, for those who don't know us, and I know many of you do, but for those who are newcomers to Harif, we are the UK Association of Jews from the Middle East and North Africa, and our mission is to raise awareness of the history, heritage, and culture of these Jews. We've got a website, www.harif.org. You have to be subscribed to our mailing list in order to receive Zoom login details. And we have a sister website which keeps you up to date with the news. It's got over 6,000 articles on different aspects of Middle East and North African Jewish history and culture. And that is Point of No Return, and you can access it via the Harif website. This session is being live streamed to the Harif Facebook page, and it's also being recorded, and the video recording hopefully will be out in a matter of hours, and you'll be able to see it and all our past recordings of all our lectures at the Harif video channel on our website. Another reminder is it's at www.harif.org. Okay, well, we hope to have comments, and if you have any questions, please do put them in the chat. There will be an opportunity to ask questions or make comments after our speakers have finished their presentations, but please do use your real name. Don't come in as iPhone or Wonder Woman or anything like that, or you won't be allowed to ask your question. So on to the topic of tonight's event, and that is General J.F.R. Jacob. General Jacob was born in 1923 into a prominent Baghdadi Jewish family in Calcutta. And just to remind everyone that Baghdadi Jews established communities in India, in Mumbai, and Calcutta, in Singapore, in Hong Kong, in Burma, Indonesia, in China in the 19th century. So General Jacob was born, as I said, in Calcutta. As he grew up, he was angered by the Nazi atrocities against the Jews, and he vowed to join the British Indian Army. He was a master strategist and was to play a seminal role in the liberation of Bangladesh after the Indian-Pakistan War of 1971. So tonight we tell the story of this outstanding and popular general who also served as governor of Goa and Punjab. He died in 2016. So we are delighted to welcome two speakers tonight. Our first speaker is Ken Robbins, who is joining us from Washington, D.C. Or rather, we are welcoming back Ken, as he gave us a fascinating talk on Baghdadis in Bollywood in May 2021. So Ken Robbins is a psychiatrist, a collector of South Asian art, and author of several books exploring the relations between Jews and Muslims, foreign Jews in the Indian subcontinent, and the contributions made by Jews to India. His latest works are Western Jews in India from the 15th century to the present, and South Asian Muslim regimes and Jewish golden ages. Our second speaker we are delighted to welcome here tonight. And he is in India, where it is 1 o'clock in the morning. So our second speaker will be Brigadier Ajit Apte, who knew General Jacob well, and in fact, their fathers knew each other, I've just been told. And Brigadier Apte will be talking about General Jacob's role in the 1971 war and his subsequent achievements. But first, let's go to Ken Robbins, who will give the first presentation. So over to you, Ken. He's muted.
Ken, sorry, let me just unmute you.
Yeah.
You need to unmute yourself, Ken. Great.
You're not unmuted.
I am unmuted.
We can hear you perfectly now.
Good. Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming, and thank you to Lynn and Lawrence Julius for arranging this. I wanted to share with you the experiences of a great man, a great Jew, a great Indian, and a great general. So I want to divide this into two parts. First of all, General Jacob, the man and his origins. And both I and Brigadier Apte, Brigadier Apte and his father were great friends of General Jacob, will speak about his early life and his formation of his personality. And then we will speak about the Bangladesh War, where he played such a crucial role in liberating Bangladesh. As Lynn told you, my latest book is South Asian Muslim Regimes and Jewish Golden Ages. Could you think of a more unlikely title? But in this book, I've tried to show how individual groups of Jews had special situations at particular times in India. And one of the greatest historians of Jews of the Middle East and in Africa and Asia was Walter Fischel, who worked in Iran and Afghanistan and India. And he published in 1948, while India and Palestine were both being partitioned, he published an article claiming that during the reign of a Muslim emperor, Akbar, that there was a golden age of equality and acceptance for all. And he gave a lot of so-called theories, but some of the things that he said are not documented. So I've seen his paper as an example of an elusive tendency by Jews to create the vision of some sort of interfaith utopia of tolerance, a peaceful kingdom of universal peace, and I focused on that. Now, it's interesting that before recent studies about India, people always pointed back to the early Muslim regimes in Iberia and Spain. And now all we hear is that India was the place where Jews did not face any anti-Semitism. So the question I asked is, if this is true and there's so many Muslims, how was this possible? Well, there were some interesting sort of things I found. In the early Indian movies, there were so many stars, mainly Baghdadi women, but there were others who were great actresses. And the leading actress in the 1920s and 30s was Salochana. And Noor Jahan, who was a film that was made and directed by Ezra Mir and featured his relative Vimla, who was then a small young girl. She was not of age as the loves of another Mughal emperor. People have also postulated that there was a golden age under the Muslim rulers of the Deccan. They seem to be ignoring that we see very little about Jews here. There's little bits and pieces and nothing negative. But there were large fights between Shia and Sunnis for control of the government of these places. But we can say that the earliest evidence of that there was a Beni Israel community, the largest group of Jews in the area, which is now Maharashtra, came from Malik Ambar, who was a strong man of one of the sultanates of the Deccan. And a large number of Jews once lived in a place called Janjira, which was ruled by African Muslims. So I've written about this in the book. But most people will talk about Kerala as a place, a golden age where Jews lived. They were always treated very well. And there's a tremendous amount of evidence for this. There's also claims that there was a Jewish kingdom at one time there, which is probably not true. And that question was that golden age destroyed by an invasion by a Muslim sultan? Was this golden age destroyed by Mysore's sultan? And yet at the same time, another community of Jews believes that he was merciful. In fact, they have a story that one of the soldiers who was fighting for the British was captured and his life was spared because he was a Beni Israel. During the 18th, 19th, and early 20th century, there was a golden age for Jews in the Indian military. The Beni Israel community itself was always involved in the military, back to the 18th century, and we think way before that. So as soldiers and sailors fighting for everybody's army, the armies of the Marathas, the armies of the British, and so on and so forth. And even when the community had fallen into a small number, there was a Admiral Sampson, a General Sampson, and a General Mordecai. So one of the things that's surprising is that even though the Beni Israel have this history, it's a Baghdadi Jew and a European Jew who are the most famous Indian Jewish soldiers. In the center of this, we see a picture of the court of Ranjit Singh, the Sikh emperor in Lahore. And one of the people here is General Ventura, who was in fact an Italian Jew. And of course, General Jacob was in fact a Baghdadi Jew. He described himself as part of the proud military traditions of Indian Jews. He pointed out, as we had discussed, that the Jews, the Beni Israel, had been in service of the forces of the Marathas and Janjira and the British in independent India. And from my book on Western Jews in India, he added General Ventura to that list. He says he met one of the greatest Indian gurus, who was descended from, whose name was Mira al-Fasl before she took the name of the mother, and her ancestor was the great North African rabbi, the Rif, Isaac al-Fazi, whose name many of the Orthodox Jews would know. And he said the mother blessed him for his role in the liberation war of Bangladesh by placing her hand on my head, and he could feel the vibrations passing through. So this is General Jacob, as he was with his Batman, and he was honored by a Beni Israel artist who was born in Mumbai, and she said that her goal was to promote the diversity of people in India and to avoid compartmentalizing each other. And General Jacob was the poster boy for that. He was born into a Baghdadi Jewish family. You see his parents in the upper left, you see him, and you see a picture of the synagogue in Calcutta, where the family worshiped when they were in Calcutta. So let me say, for those of you who are not familiar with this, how it happened the Jews came to Calcutta. Jews have been coming for trade and other reasons on and off to India for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. In the 18th century, 17th century, they were in a place called Surat, which is in Western India. As that port became less important, The next port to come up was Calcutta. And a Jew from Aleppo came and founded the Jewish community. And there he is on an elephant, which he was given the privilege to ride by a Muslim Nawab. And of course, the most famous Jewish site in Calcutta is the famous cake shop in New Market of Nahum. According to the artist that I had make this story of the Jews of Calcutta, the Jews led a charmed life, and things were so good that they could even have prawns, but most of them kept kosher. But he took this back, this painting, because he wanted to add Jewish stars. And as you can see, he had a lot of 5-pointed stars, obviously not knowing Jewish stars are 6-pointed. Jews remember Baghdad as a wonderful place. There was a wonderful sojourn of even European refugees, as well as Baghdadi Jews in Calcutta. Let's discuss the situation when General Jacob was coming in. The Japanese were threatening to come into India, and Calcutta was in their sights. There was a famine on. About 200 Jewish refugees were coming. Refugees from the Farhud in Iraq came, and many refugees from the Baghdadi Jewish trading diaspora in places like Rangoon came. There was a Jewish Refugees Relief Association, and Sir David Ezra of the Baghdadi community guaranteed support, and they were amazed at how well they were treated. Many of them led an Anglophile life. Let me give you an example. Rachel Sofair, as a young woman, was starred in silent movies. And there you can see her on the right-hand side as a typical Indian heroine. But here's how she lived in Calcutta. See what she wore at her wedding and see what she wore with her family. One of the most Anglophile people was R.J. Minnie, who saw himself as an Englishman. And everything that he wrote was in the voice of an Englishman. His most famous work was the movie Clive of India, for example. So with taking this into account, we see an early picture of General Jacob. And General Jacob, in this case, is with the Northern Bengal Mounted Rifles, and all the other faces are British faces. He himself saw himself as an Indian. And after his great military service, he was governor of Goa and Punjab. Israel put a plaque of a wall of honor of Ammunition Hill in Jerusalem. And everywhere he went, he was honored by the Indian military. You see, Lieutenant General Baljit Singh was another person who honored him. And he saw himself as a Jew, an Indian through and through, but his primary identity was as an Indian. And let me turn this over to Brigadier Apte.
Good. May I start? Thank you, Ken. That was a wonderful insight on.
Before you start, Brigadier Apte, I'd like to introduce you properly. You were commissioned into the Indian Army's Regiment of Artillery in 1970. You participated in the 1971 India-Pakistan War on the Eastern Front. You commanded a field regiment and an artillery brigade, as well as holding staff command and instructional appointments in the army. You played cricket, and you were a cricket commentator on All India Radio. And after retiring from the army in 2005, you held high positions in multinational companies and a chemical company. So without more ado, I will hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Lynn, for that introduction, and also to Ken. I'll not take too long because Ken has already given a brief background on General Jacob, and he wanted me to cover in the first part my connection with General Jacob. So I'll briefly just mention that before we start the slideshow. General Jacob trained at the Officers Training School, Mau, and my father trained at the Officers Training School, Bangalore. I must remind the listeners here that the Indian Military Academy, which was established in Dehradun, had been shut down for regular commissions because of the Second World War. And all emergency commissions were being given. So the other two academies were in Mau and in Bangalore. But my father and Jacob were the same batch. There was a difference of 5 days in commissioning. My father's passing out parade was on 31 May 1942, whereas General Jacob's passing out parade was on 6 June 1942. But they were the same batch. And soon after commissioning, General Jacob, of course, joined the 1st Anti-Tank Regiment, which had just come out from the Western Desert and were recouping in Iraq. Whereas my father was commissioned into what is known as the 8th Anti-Tank Regiment, and one of its batteries joined up Jacob's regiment, that is the 1st Anti-Tank Regiment, sometime in 1942 October. When my father was commissioned in 42 May, this battery got detached and got hooked on to 1st Anti-Tank Regiment outside Iraq. And that's the first time my father and Jacob met. May I have the slideshow, please? Could I have the slideshow? Yeah. So very briefly, Ken has already covered. So this is how General Jacob looked. And I put down in blue my father's connection with him. My father was Indian Commission IC number 469, and Jacob was Indian Commission IC number 470. So that gives you an idea how close my father and General Jacob were. They were together in the Burma campaign. After the war finished, their regiment was deployed in the Dutch East Indies as part of the Southeast Asian Command, as you all know, which was headed by Admiral Mountbatten. And they fought under the 26th Indian Infantry Division right through Burma, including the Arakan campaign. And after the liberation of Rangoon, they moved ahead and they occupied the Dutch East Indies till 1946. In December 1946, my father, General Jacob, and there was another Muslim officer, Shaukat Raza. They were all three commissioned together in the same regiment. All three of them got selected to do the prestigious Gunnery Staff course at Larkhill in the UK. In fact, my father got married just before leaving for England, and General Jacob attended the marriage and then gave the good news to my father that they had been selected for this prestigious course. Both were one of the first Indian instructors gunnery who came back from Larkhill, UK at the School of Artillery. General Shaukat Raza, he rose to become the Director General Artillery in the Pakistan Army. But when India was partitioned, he chose to go to Pakistan. My father was told to rush back to India. Jacob stayed back because I have a feeling Jacob's elder brother who joined the Air Force and his younger brother, they both had migrated to England after demobilization. So my father was given orders to move back to India, report to Army Headquarters Delhi, and report to School of Artillery Devlali because India's partition was round the corner. And the British officers who had been instructors at the School of Artillery were to leave. So my father reached there, and within 20 days, this is my father, extreme left. He was a subaltern during the Second World War, Burma campaign, Royal Indian Artillery. The middle picture is when he was doing the gunnery staff course at the UK, Larkhill. and his badges have Royal Indian Artillery. And extreme right is when he was brigade commander, he commanded 2 brigades. In fact, my father's and General Jacob's career was near parallel. They both commanded regiments together on the same day. My father raised 14 Field Regiment. Incidentally, I was commissioned into 14 Field Regiment. I fought the 71 war with the 14 Field Regiment. And whereas my father was the first commanding officer, I had the distinction of becoming the 15th commanding officer of the same regiment. On that same day, 14 May 1956, General Jacob took over command of 3 Field Regiment, so they were parallel. After that, my father went as Chief of Staff of the UN Forces, part of the International Commission for Supervision and Control to Indochina, and Jacob became a full colonel on staff. From there, my father took over a mountain brigade in the northeast, then came as the Samaria commander to Calcutta, whereas Jacob, after commanding his brigade, came as School of Artillery, Devlari. And General Jacob often joked with my father that he belonged to Calcutta, so he would prefer to come to Calcutta, and my father would come as the commandant of the School of Artillery. Incidentally, my father had done 3 tenures as instructor, chief instructor, and commander of the field wing. So he was happy, but the 1965 war broke out, and that's how they maintained their positions. General Jacob has seen me when I was born, and he told me he attended my first birthday. While in service, he always made it a point to call on me. I was in army headquarters. He called me home number of times to Som Vihar for a meal, and that was when he had retired. But when I was the Brigadier General Staff at the School of Artillery, General Jacob, whenever he visited, he would always request the commandant that he didn't require a separate liaison officer. He would take Apte as his liaison officer, and I would travel with him and conduct him. So I think that was a great thing. General Jacob was a great man. I have great respect for him, and he was a very dear friend of my father. And in fact, when my father passed away very suddenly in 1994, General Jacob wrote a beautiful piece, which I have shared with Ken. It is too long to put here. And I was happy that I could visit the School of Artillery, Lark Hill. They were very kind to call us. Here is General Jacob's profile. He done the artillery missile course, and his attributes: penchant for maneuver battle. He is the architect of 12 infantry divisions, doctrines in the desert, which stood him in good stead when the 71 war was being planned by him in the Eastern Command. Next. I would request you to kindly read this. I'll read it out for you because some may not be able to read it. This is a very interesting manuscript letter written by my father's and Jacob's battery commander. His name is, sorry, can you please show the slide again? Yeah. Major Norman Harding was my father's battery commander during the war. He's gone now, but he was settled in Sussex. I visited him. He showed me these notes, and his son was very kind to transfer all his manuscript letters to me. I'll read it out. He wrote this in 1942 when he was battery captain, and it says, it was at about that time that we had 3 Indian commissioned officers join us. Bhaiya Apte, a Hindu, Chaco Jacob. He said, I never knew what he actually was, but he said, I presumed him to be a Hindu, and Shaukat Raza, Ali Raza, Muslim. In later years, they all became distinguished soldiers. Apte became a brigadier. Jacob was commander-in-chief of the Eastern Command, and Shaukat Raza was a divisional commander in Bangladesh. I must mention here that after the 71 war, General Shaukat Raza met General Jacob, and the first thing he asked him is, any news about Apte? So Jacob told him, yes, Apte is retired, settled in Calcutta, but he said his son joined the army and he's fighting against your division with the 9th Infantry Division of the Indian Army. General Shaukat Raza incidentally commanded the Pakistan 9th Infantry Division, but just before the war was declared, he handed over that division to another officer and moved on staff and was subsequently captured. So this manuscript letter came to me from Major Norman Harding's son, and I have preserved this, and I thought I'll show it today because this is exactly what Major Norman Harding thought of these 3 Indian officers then. Thank you. Ken, I have finished my part, and if there are any questions, I've just given a brief glimpse of my father's equation with General Jacob.
Right, thank you very much for that. Ken, would you like to carry on with the presentation?
I'd like to carry on. Is it on the screen now?
Yep.
Okay.
Oh, you've got you're doing your own one. You were going to do your right.
Birth of a Nation, is that basically there was this war, and everything is how you see a war from what thing. At the time this war was going on, I myself was.
Yeah. So sorry, Ken, shall we do your slides for you?
Yes. Oh, wait, I can do them. Okay, but I have it on my screen, but can you screen share?
If you got it on, if you want to do it, you just press the screen share button and then pull up the presentation like you did before.
I'll have to. Okay.
Perfect.
Great.
Oh, it went back to the beginning. So let me start saying that everybody looks at a war from their own perspective. First of all, they make comparisons to wars that are going on at the present time. And just like what's going on in Gaza right now, the whole question is, will one of the superpowers in Security Council continue to veto measures? And the big problem was that both Pakistan and America and China as well, all were in favor of Pakistan at that time. And Russia was the power that kept on setting the vetoes in the United Nations. And so General Jacob's great contribution was here that he convinced the Pakistanis to surrender quickly. Otherwise, there probably would not have been a Pakistani breakup, and Bangladesh would not have been created. If we look at a map of how Bangladesh came into thing, we have to start with what was the vision of Muslim India and South Asia in the 1930s. And you can see the shaded areas. What is now Pakistan later became Western Pakistan. Uzbekistan was Hyderabad, which was ruled by a Muslim, even though it had a Hindu majority population. And the Indians rolled in and took it over and became part of India. And what they call Bangi Islam, which was became East Pakistan and later Bangladesh. As you can see, these two areas, West Pakistan and East Pakistan, are totally divided. The population was totally different. 55% of the people spoke Bengali, and the language that was promoted as the national language was Urdu, which only a few percentage of people spoke. And the Western Pakistan people wanted to maintain power against the majority of people who were in Bangladesh. One could see from these Bangladesh stamps the feeling that this war was a genocidal war, in which Bengalis were tortured, and there are all these stories about what happened. And so General Jacob being able to help bring the Bangladeshis out of the control of the West Pakistanis was a great thing. this is recognized today. Here I am at on the left-hand side at the Bangladesh Liberation War Museum with the director, Mofadil Huq, and Nahar Khan of the Cosmos Foundation. And General Jacob is certainly honored there at that museum. And here he is getting an award from the Prime Minister of Bangladesh. And he's a great hero in everybody's eyes there. Frankly, he's not the only Jewish hero in Bangladesh. The greatest building of the 20th century was built originally ordered by the Pakistanis and completed by the Bangladeshis after they broke off from Pakistan. And this was by Louis Kahn, an American Jewish architect. And I can only tell you, if you go to this building, you can't appreciate it for any pictures. It's unbelievably magnificent. Now, Jacob had some contact with the Bangladeshis. He had a relative named Morty Cohn. Now, Morty Cohn's ancestors had come from Iran and settled in what later became East Pakistan. They had been there over 100 years. And he was the first news announcer on Dhaka's Pakistan TV. He was a favorite with the soldiers of the Pakistani army, and he often joined them for celebrations and so on and so forth. In 1968, he and his parents fled to Calcutta because of numerous anti-Semitic threats. In Calcutta, he hosted people from the freedom fighters, was involved in clandestine radio broadcasts, and met General Jacob several times. Jacob himself had a lot of contacts, was in Calcutta at the time. He suggested the Bangladeshis perform a provisional government in exile, modeling after the Free French government that de Gaulle set up during World War II. And in March of 1971, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman declared that Bangladesh was a sovereign, independent nation. And he asked the Indians, General Jacob asked the Indians to get guarantees for the Hindu minority and transit rights and so on and so forth, and so on and so forth. Now, in any war, there are always atrocities, and people are always very skeptical of atrocities. So he set out to inform correspondents like that of the Sunday Times, and he embedded a reporter from the New York Times in the Indian troops who went all the way with him to Dhaka. And that reporter changed his focus in his reporting to war atrocities. And when he moved his attention from the killing fields of the Pakistani army in 71, he led to his studies of the killing fields of the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. So he influenced things in that way as well. Now, I had a chance to discuss with him one of his great deceptions. He was known for his great deceptions. So one of the things was he knew that the Americans were in bed with the Pakistanis. Why were the Americans in bed with the Pakistanis? They saw the Pakistanis as allies. Remember in the 1950s at the Bandung Conference, who represented the United States who did not send an official delegation? It was Pakistan, Iran, Iraq, and I think it was also Turkey and Lebanon, if I remember correctly. It's hard to believe that that would be the case, but that was the case at the time. And a friend of mine who later became the Foreign Secretary of Pakistan, Sultan Mohammed Khan, was the handler of Kissinger for the Pakistanis at that time. And he was bringing Kissinger to meet the Chinese. So they had the opening with Zhou Enlai. So they were totally in bed with the Pakistanis. And the Indians were also afraid that the Chinese would invade at that time. So here's the deception that General Jacob did. He brought a political officer for the American consulate to his house. And he kept on insisting that the guy go to the bathroom. Jacob, I remember Jacob telling me the story and saying, I told the son of a bitch, go to the bathroom. You drank so much, you must go to the bathroom. He had set up a map that supposedly showed where all the Indian troops were deployed, knowing that the American diplomat would have to pass that in order to get to the bathroom. And in that way, he deceived the Americans, who then apparently passed the information on to the Pakistanis. He was known as a great strategist and a great understanding of things. I remember him telling me, and I know he told other people this too, that there was tremendous feeling that if the Americans invaded Iraq, that Saddam Hussein would fight to the last man. It would be door-to-door battles and so on and so forth. And he said, tell the Americans that he will just fade away, and yes, there will be a resistance. You'll be able to march right into Baghdad, and you won't know if the resistance is led by Saddam Hussein. He'll just disappear. And my reaction was, first of all, I had no contacts. And second of all, who would believe me? I tell him some Jewish general from India came up with this thing when everybody knew that Saddam Hussein was going to fight to the last man. He then set up a strategy for dealing with this conflict with Pakistan. And he had to fight many cases. And he even wrote at one point, I had to ignore orders. Well, what was it that he did? The Indians were fighting against an enemy that was well entrenched and well supplied. And that enemy was going to get a ceasefire. But the Russians kept on vetoing the UN resolution, and it looked like they were going to stop it. And he had to go in and convince the Pakistani general to surrender. And I don't really know quite deal. I never actually discussed this with him, but my understanding is that he went in, met with the Pakistani general, General Niazi, and convinced him to surrender, saying that otherwise he was going to bomb him when he didn't have the planes to do it. He didn't have the men to guard all the people that he had captured, and the Pakistanis surrendered something like 90,000 troops. And he protected them from the wrath of the Bangladeshis as well. So I'll give this over to Brigadier Apte now.
Okay, so over to you, Brigadier Apte.
I've got to unmute, darling.
Yeah,
I've got to give you a few seconds.
just a few seconds.
Okay.
May I continue?
Yes.
Please.
Let me just get your
Yeah.
Thank you.
So-
And I think you gave an excellent overview, very well summarized, very succinct. So let's get on to the first slide, because yeah, if you can come to the first slide.
Sorry, I've just got
Yeah.
someone trying to tell me I've got to get in there. Sorry, I'm trying to do more than one screen at once.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I just want to highlight what Ken said. Jacob was actually in the vanguard for conceptualization of war, its strategy, staging forward combat elements, building logistics, infrastructure, and you can see it on the slide. That is General Arora, the army chief, on the missions and objectives in East Pakistan and shaping the battlefield since March 71. We were all deployed. I was deployed in September 71 as part of Operation Jackpot till 30th November. And that was basically to take care of the activities by the Mukti Bahini and what was happening. As Ken has mentioned, that the government in exile had been formed at Shakespeare Sarani in Calcutta in June. As the Chief of Staff, Eastern Army, He established harmonious communication at all levels with the three corps commanders, focusing on a single agenda. I must highlight out here that the Chief of Staff plays a very key role with the corps commanders. We had the three corps, the newly raised two corps, of which I was a part, where General Raina had raised the new corps in the Jessore-Khulna sector. Then we had the 33 corps, under which the famous Battle of Hilli was fought. And of course, we had the 101 communication zone under General Gandharv Nagara, who came down. But the main effort by 4 corps, General Sagat Singh, which actually turned everything around and made the capture of Dhaka possible, was all because of General Jacob's communication with the corps commanders, his communication with army headquarters, his communication with the Director General Military Operations, strategically looking at what China could do, what the Americans could do, what the British could do. And he kept playing his game. I must also tell you that I was a second lieutenant then. We didn't have enough maps. The terrain was all marshy. There were obstacles, there were riverine terrain, and placing of engineer resources was a major task. Movement of the artillery guns. I'm an artillery officer, so I know how difficult it was. Moving the tanks, getting everything together. I think General Jacob masterminded it very well. He had the full confidence of the army commander and subsequently the army chief also. Next slide, please. Just to give you a quick idea, very briefly, if you see the blue arrows on the southwest is my corps, that is 2 corps, comprising of 9 infantry division and 4 infantry division, which came down towards Jessore, and then we swung down to Khulna. In the middle, you have the 20 division under 33 corps, which fought the Battle of Hilli. And on the northwest, you see the 2 arrows. That is what the 101st Communication Zone came down with. But if you see on the eastern part, the thrust, the heliborne operations, and all that happened was with 4 corps under General Sagat Singh, the corps commander, who was always in the front in his helicopter, and he ensured that the helicopters lifted a complete division across the Meghna River, which frankly the Pakistanis never expected. And I don't even think our own army chief and the Prime Minister had expected at that juncture. So this, in a nutshell, gives you the orbit of the Western Front 2 Corps, Northwestern 20 Mountain Division, Northeast, I have put it down here, and the Southeast, the 4 Corps and the Meghna River crossing with the 8, 23 and 57 divisions. So in a nutshell, because it's very difficult and time consuming to brief on all the offensive actions, but it was a well coordinated offensive action and we were in tandem. We had been told that the US 7th Fleet has sailed in, and that's why the objectives for my division were changed and we were rushed to Khulna, because there are 3 ports there, Khulna, Changla and Bangla, and we didn't want the Pakistanis to escape. I was there in the Battle of Garibpur. I was the officer who blindfolded the first enemy pilots who were shot down over my gun position in our sector on 22nd November 1971, before war was declared. And I was there throughout the battle in the offensive operations, but I was a subaltern, so my knowledge that time was limited. But as I rose in rank and file, I gathered a lot of knowledge, and that is how this has been put together. Next slide, please. Just giving you a glimpse of what all Jacob's strategy was in tandem with his other commanders. We had the special heliborne operations at Select. We had the parachute drop of two Maratha battalion of 50 independent parachute brigade with the Air Force and with a parachute field battery from the artillery. We had an airborne assault at Tangel, and this has never been done after the Second World War, when the Allied invasion at Normandy took place with the 101st and the 82nd US Airborne Divisions. This was the largest airborne assault, where the Indian Army captured the Pungli Bridge intact and denied Pakistan's 93 Brigade from falling back to protect Dhaka. On the left, of course, the picture you've seen, Ken has already shown to you. Prime Minister's aims were achieved when Mujibur Rahman was released. And here is General Jacob very happy with the army commander when Sheikh Mujibur Rahman is signing the visitor's book after his release from West Pakistan on his way to his own country. Next. I'd just like to say, this was the trump card wielded by General Jacob for the Eastern Army Commander's directions to be conveyed. To bridge the gap, he had good rapport with the Director of Military Operations and the Air Force, Navy. I believe his orchestration of battle enabling commanders to thrust deep strike hard has been mentioned in the Pakistan's National Defense College magazine, where they have written that credit of the victory goes to General Jacob's meticulous planning and preparations. His ingenuity, planning and execution led to the creation of Bangladesh and architecting the surrender at Dhaka with maturity, as Ken has already mentioned. General Jacob played a great role. So did the other military commanders. As you all know, in military warfare, it is not just one leader who succeeds. He leads well, and that is how the Indian Army was successful in liberating Bangladesh. Just a few other pictures. Next. This picture you've seen, General Niazi is not too happy, but he can't help it. In fact, the Pakistan Army wanted a ceasefire and to be allowed to go back, but General Jacob insisted on a complete surrender and no going back, and that finally worked. Next. This is the famous picture which was signed at the Ramna race course in Dhaka. This surrender took place on 16 December 1971. In my sector in Khulna, the war went on for one day extra because our brigade commander, the enemy brigade commander, thought that the US 7th Fleet will evacuate them, but that didn't happen. So, but the surrender in my sector took place on 17th, and I was witness there to see the Pakistan Army surrendering in Khulna. Next. Subsequently, Jacob got promoted as a corps commander, got promoted as an army commander. And one thing I must bring out, Ken has already brought out, he was chief, he had created trust with the chief ministers, governors. And he architected the silent reconciliation in the disturbed areas, in the insurgent areas. But a far-sighted strategic document for the Andaman Nicobar Archipelago, for the Malacca Straits, and India's national security needs was conceived by him as the army commander way back in 1974, and it is now gathering momentum. He suggested that India build strong military presence west of the Malacca Straits to enhance our military presence and prevent our adversaries seeking naval bases there. And thus we could enlarge the hegemony amongst Southeast Asian nations. I think a great strategic vision by General Jacob. Next. As governor of Goa, governor of Punjab, he did very well. He connected with the masses and they loved him. He would often go to a garden unannounced and connect with the students. He conceptualized the Chandigarh War Memorial, got it designed by the students of the university, by the Chandigarh College of Architecture, and inaugurated it. Next. Some nice pictures. Here he is with Prime Minister Modi, giving him his book. Then he is conducting the swearing in for the Chief Minister of Punjab. And on the right, as Ken brought out, great honor given to him by the government of Bangladesh. Next. His name is there, honored by Israel with a plaque on the Wall of Honor at the Ammunition Hill in Jerusalem. Here he is with Queen Elizabeth II of Britain. They all recognized him and they all gave him great respect and honor. Next. General Jacob, finally, before I close, I must tell you, he gave away a lot of his personal collections, gifted to the Regiment of Artillery, artifacts, old guns, statues in the Fort William Command Library. There's a Jacob Gallery in our officers' mess in Devlani. He got the General Roberts statue from Calcutta with the Chief Minister's permission. His interests and hobbies were tremendous. And he mixed it with all kinds of people. And I am witness to it because I visited him quite often when I was in Army headquarters. And I would go and spend an evening with him and have a drink and potluck dinner. And he would not hesitate to call me informally on numerous occasions. So I have tasted his excellent warm hospitality and also seen everything in his house. Next. As Ken brought out, he was one of the dignitaries that went to Bangladesh, and he is the architect for the exchange of war veterans between India and Bangladesh, which is continuing since 2008. And it's a wonderful exchange for all of us. I've had the great opportunity of being invited by Bangladesh in 2010. Next. This is the famous statue which he got from Calcutta. It's placed in the Regiment of Artillery, and General Jacob always takes pride in taking a picture with this statue. Next. This is General Jacob's own house, and all this is there, and he very proudly stands there and gets himself pictured. So that's General Jacob for you all, one of the most illustrious, dignified, distinguished officers and gentlemen of the Indian Armed Forces. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brigadier Apte. That was a wonderful summary of his military achievements and him as a person. And thank you, Ken. I think we got an all-round view of the man, and it's a wonderful tribute. I just wondered, did he ever marry?
No.
No, he didn't. Right. Sorry, Ken.
I know,
you got
Ken. Ken's
Yeah.
spotlight. I've just, every time I go to do something, someone looks to come in the meeting, so they're all
Yeah.
sequence
Okay.
changes.
All right.
So it's not right. Brilliant.
Okay. No, thank you both. Does anyone have any comments? I know before, when I advertised the meeting, several people said that they had met General Jacob and had personal meetings with him, which I found fascinating. Obviously, a very personable man, and who touched, many people.
Well, I've had one question sent to me in the chat. What do the initials PVSM after his name stand for?
Brigadier?
After his
PVSM is a distinguished award called Param Visishta Seva Medal, given to people who have performed distinguishedly. We have got Param Visishta Seva Medal, the highest award. Then we've got the Ati Visishta Seva Medal. Then we've got the Visishta Seva Medal. These are all three for distinguished service, like what you had during the British times, the Distinguished Service Order, that's the DSO. So India has its own Param Visishta Seva Medal, means the ultimate distinguished service. Ati Visishta is one lower than that, and Visishta Seva Medal is one lower than that. That is what the PVSM is.
Great, thank you.
Great. If you've got more questions, please put them in the chat.
Yeah.
And what about Mr. Balkar?
Yes.
I will unmute and let him. Yes. No
Dr.
problem.
Vivalka, would you like to say a few words? I know he's also joining us from India, and he is actually writing about General Jacob. He told me he hadn't actually met him personally, but he is writing his story. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit about that.
Right, what's his first name, darling?
Yeshwar Bivalka.
Right, okay. Sorry.
It's coming up now.
In the Bangladesh war, he is
Yes.
the first person or only person, I will say, saying that Dhaka should be captured, the center of gravity of the battlefield.
Right.
Because the original plan was not include Dhaka as an object. So this is the very big contribution of General.
Yeah.
And for this, he has organized.
I'm afraid- sorry, we can't hear you very well, Doctor.
Yes.
Perhaps you could write a couple of sentences in the comments, because
Yes.
you're breaking up.
So this was the contribution. That is working on the what you call is a logistics. That is the requirement to run the at the war or even in the peace. You require a lot of activity that is as important as war.
I'm sorry, we can't really hear you.
What I might do is
Yeah.
I might try and
Yeah.
You can't hear.
video.
No,
I'll turn
no.
off the video
It could be-
and if you've got better bandwidth. Okay,
Yeah.
now if you try now, it might be
Yeah.
better.
Yeah. Can you just repeat what you said?
I said he is another contribution made, that is the logistics.
Right.
Logistics is a science of organizing the support to the army, requirement of the army in the
Right.
war as well as peacetime. And
Excellent.
Bangladesh in particular, that is the East Pakistan, the problem was bridging.
Yes.
You will find every mile or two, you will come across a river.
Right.
And unless you have bridging equipment, you can't cross it.
Right.
So organizing that bridging equipment and engineering efforts, they were organized basically by the Jacob through engineering troops. That is another contribution he has. So these are the two main important contributions Jacob is having in the Bangladesh war.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Can I
Okay.
reinforce what he's saying, because it's important, and these two gentlemen have said something very important about this man. Number one, did you ever hear of Alexander the Great and the Gordian knot? Nobody could untie this knot, and Alexander the Great just put his sword through it. That's exactly what General Jacob did here.
Yeah.
It looked like you were going to have to fight and go over all these bridges and these rivers, and it would be very difficult terrain. And they had a limited amount of time to do it before ceasefire was going to be called, and it was going to be inconclusive, and Bangladesh was not going to be created. He said, I'm going right to Dhaka. I'm going to get the surrender, and he got the surrender. The second thing that you're hearing is that he wasn't just a cowboy who could do rash things. He was a very well-organized person who had strategically considered, not only in this campaign, but you heard what Brigadier Apte said. He had plans for what was going to go on island archipelagos outside of India, which is usually a naval thing. He had a comprehensive strategy for India militarily. So
Right.
he was both kinds of things, an actor and a strategist.
Great. Great. Thank you very much indeed. Does anyone else want to contribute to the discussion?
Janet Evans has a question as
Yeah.
well. A couple of questions looking at you now. Right,
Okay.
Janet Evans, did General Jacob change his political alliances as politics in the region changed?
Do you want to take that, Brigadier Apte? How did his politics change?
He's muted.
Let me unmute you, sorry.
Yeah. Sorry, you're
You're
muted at the moment.
Fine.
Okay.
Is it that General Jacob changed his political alliances? Is that the question?
Yes.
Did he change his political alliances and how did they adapt is the question.
Yeah. Did his politics change as alliances changed?
Well, frankly, I'll tell you, all military personnel are apolitical. So while he was in service, I will say that nothing changed. Subsequently, when he retired, he of course was selected and he became governor of 2 states. But whether his actual original political thinking changed is very difficult for me to comment. But having known him quite well, I don't think it changed. He had a very clear, firm, and decisive mind, and I think he stuck to that.
I think the next question that was asked was a very
Yes.
good one by Melik Viswanath, and that was, most of the Baghdadis saw themselves as sojourners in India. And so I've tried to put this in a historical perspective, which is that throughout history, there have been any number of ports that have become more and less important in India. And whenever there was a port, whether it was Quilon or Cochin or Surat, Jews were involved in those ports. And they left those places when those port cities no longer became important. So I see what happened with the Baghdadis leaving as not an unusual phenomenon for India. The question that this person raises is a very good one, because you heard that other members of his family did leave for England. And why did he stay and they left? Why were these people so Anglophile and he was so identified with India? I don't know the answer to that. I think it's interesting that of the few Baghdadi Jews that are left in Calcutta, they include his relatives as well. The Silimans, Flower and Yal Siliman are related to him. And there must be something different about the way in which he did it. And I don't think we really talked about how strongly he felt about being non-sectarian, because he throughout his whole career, he got along extremely well with Muslim officers, including things where he worked with, and in positions we had to deal with Pakistani officers and so on and so forth. And we know that he worked with Iraqi officers and so on and so forth. And considering his background and his history, the fact that he was able to do this, I think, was extraordinary. And he never gave up his politics as a very strong supporter of Israel and a very strong Jew, but he also was able to do this at the same time. And maybe the lesson that we can learn from this is that many Jews, because of the anomalous position they find themselves in different countries, can have a double consciousness where they can work on many different levels at the same time and do what's appropriate in whatever position they're in, even if that doesn't always.
You've answered Doug Dalglish's question, which was what was his attitude to Zionism? Did he express support? So is there anything else you can say about his relations with Zionism, with Israel? Did he visit?
He had very good relationships with Israel, but his statements to the Indian people were, you can be a very loyal Jew, but your first identity should be to India.
Anyone else want to say anything? Oh, yeah. Serena has her hand up. Good to see you. Laura suggests unmuting you.
Yes.
Oh dear. Serena.
Oh, all right,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
not now, it's
yeah.
I know what you mean.
He's got you now. Won't be a minute.
Okay, awesome. Right.
Hi, thank you so much for this wonderful talk. I actually wrote a book recently about a family that settled in Calcutta. It's about the Layla family and the Ezekiel family. And these two families I did a family history on them. They had come from, the Laylas had come from Baghdad, and they settled in Singapore. And the Ezekiels were actually in Calcutta. And the wife was Ezekiel, the husband was a Layla. They had settled in Singapore and then had moved down to Calcutta before World War II, I think about 1933, if I'm not mistaken. I'd have to go back and check my book. But anyway, so they were there, and they had, a lot of kids there, and talked a lot about what life was like. And not only that, but during World War II as British citizens, what life was like for them there during World War II. And basically, after World War II, they had to leave because the British were very unwelcome because of what was going on with, with independence, Indian independence, and Gandhi, and there were a lot of riots and things like that. So I just was curious, because in all of this, I don't see much reference to these families. And it took a lot of digging on my part. It turned out that the wife was an Ezekiel, but her mother was a Sassoon. And I only found that out because we finally got her birth certificate, and it took like moving heaven and earth just to get that. I wasn't getting much cooperation from the British India Society and the local community, and even in Singapore, I was having a lot of difficulty. Anyway, I just wanted to point it out. I don't really have a question unless you know about these families.
I would love to talk to you about them, but I wondered, are they mentioned in David Ezra's book about Calcutta in his genealogy?
I looked at that book, but the father, the Sassoon was an Abraham Sassoon, and I reached out to the Sassoons in their family tree, and we kind of couldn't figure out the link. But the birth certificate clearly said what the father's name was, and she was born in British India in Calcutta. I have the birth certificate.
Not every Sassoon was in the Sassoon family. For example, in my collection, I have a ketubah from 1910 from Faizabad, India, of Sassoon, but they're not related at all to those, the family.
Okay, well, maybe I can put you together, and you can, Ken, if you've got information for Serena. Serena is a foremost genealogist of Sephardi families.
Right, now we have
So
someone
I can
called
put you
Joe
together.
Jacob wants to speak.
Yeah.
Perhaps it's a relative.
Ah,
I have
okay.
no idea. Okay, would you like to unmute yourself?
Yeah, okay. Actually, my name is Joe Jacob. I grew up Baghdadi heritage in Calcutta. I did not know General Jacob, but my father actually knew him very well. I may have also some contacts with the people you were talking about, the Ezekiel family. I knew Ezekiel families, but I'm not sure which one you were looking at. What I found very interesting was if you look at the history of India and the Europeans moving to India, the first were actually the Portuguese, and they established the state of Goa. The Portuguese also wanted to have it when they realized that there was a Jewish community close to Cochin. They wanted to have an inquisition, but they couldn't do it by themselves. They had to get support from the local rulers. So they approached the local ruler and said, this is what they wanted to do. And the local rulers looked at him and said, no, these are our people. They have been with us for hundreds and hundreds of years, and you are forbidden from having an inquisition. And that is when he moved the Jewish community to Cochin into an area which became known as Jewtown, and the Portuguese were forbidden from going in there. So I just thought that was an interesting comment. Yeah, no, I'm not at all related to General Jacob, although I know people, they passed away, who were related to him. But I knew many Ezekiel families. There were many Ezekiel families. And of course, there was a Sassoon who was married to Sir David Ezra, Rachel Sassoon. So if you need some of the history, actually, I have a lot of that history. So I'd be happy to share it with you.
Well,
I want to pick up your remarks there because I think they're very important. The history of every town and the Jewish history is all different.
Yes.
And we really have to get into this. And so can you imagine somebody who's trying to do 5 books on Jews and Muslims in South Asia? Must be some material. And one of the books is going to be on Jews and trade, early trade, and the relationship between Jews, Muslims, and the Portuguese, to cover all of these questions. Because right now we don't have this written up as a history. It's written up as sort of tales from person to person, and that's not the proper way to do things.
Yeah.
Well, that was absolutely fascinating. Thank you for that insight into Portuguese and all that. Wonderful. So I just asked you to just to put down your email, perhaps your email address, so that people can contact you for more information on those families. Anyone else wants to say something? No? Yes? Joe? Joe would like to say something. Joe Mankiewicz?
Unmute yourself, Joe.
Can you unmute yourself?
I feel very humbled here because I don't really belong with all these people. I'm really a nobody. I'm a South African. I happen to be Jewish, but my origins are Lithuania, Eastern Europe and Russia. I have connections with India, and our son actually married a girl from Mumbai, and a Brahmin family, originally from the south. And I had a military background in South Africa. I studied a bit of military history, and I was introduced to General Jacob by his Major Chandrakant Singh, who was his major in the campaign in November 1971. And I spent a wonderful afternoon at his flat. We were lucky to see photographs of his flat. He was a great lover of art, and not just a lover of art, he was an authority, especially on Louis XIV furniture. He knew a lot about paintings. And he was there, when I studied his battle plans, which took a whole day to study the battle plans, he had a mind like a laser. It was all enveloping, but he didn't miss any little tricks. And everything was planned and thought of in advance, as it should be. And he'd mastered it all. And I felt very privileged to have been there. And I just want to say something completely unrelated. And we speak about Calcutta. There's a professor, I think, of social history at Calcutta University. His name is Navrajat Afridi, whom I knew in Delhi when he was there before. And he believes that his people, the Pashtun, are one of the lost tribes of Israel. And he does tour Australia and America lecturing on this topic. See, my mind is all jumbled up with different attitudes to Jews.
Can I comment on his 2 remarks? Because I think they're important. Number one, I wonder how many of you know that when Gandhi went to South Africa, it was a Lithuanian Jew, Kallenbach, who bought Tolstoy Farm, which was the first thing that Gandhi set up. And they too were very, very close in leading the political movement. And Navras has a Pathan father and a Hindu and Sikh mother, and is a totally secular person. This story that the Pashtuns are descended from Jews or is Beni Israel is old, and it takes all sorts of convoluted ways of doing this. For example, they have all sorts of convoluted things related back to King Saul and so on and so forth. And there's also in Lucknow, in that area, near Lucknow in UP, called the Beni Israel, who are Muslims and have nothing to do with Jews and so on. But the thing that we haven't done in talking about the history of Jews in the Middle East is we never talk about the Jewish kingdom, the Himmerite kingdom in Arabia, which had Jewish kings, pre-Islamic times, and the tribes, the Jewish tribes that were there when Muhammad lived. It's sort of like, for some reason, we never talk about them.
Well,
And I don't
perhaps
understand that.
if you can find somebody who can talk about it, we'd love to have a Harif lecture on it.
Well, Kenneth can talk about it blindfold.
Yeah.
I want to say to Kenneth that I was in the liberation movement in South Africa, which is how I landed up in England. I was expelled. And we had quite a few Indian people, and at higher levels, who were very active in the movement. And sadly, even one of my comrades was questioned in the police headquarters, and he exited the building by the top floor window. It's a constant nightmare. People never knew about these things.
Oh, dear. Yeah. Anyway, thank you so much for sharing all that information. Fascinating. And
I just want to share something in a second.
yeah, okay. Lawrence just wants to share something. I have to unmute him.
No, you can't unmute me, we get an echo. Sorry, I just did it already. This is really for Brigadier Apte. See what he thinks about these documents, and he can tell us about them.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you exactly what they are later.
Okay. Meanwhile,
Everyone, the other
okay.
one. Yes. Sorry. Give me a second. I want the other picture first. Sorry. Let me get it right.
I don't think so. Maybe.
Sorry.
Meanwhile, Ken, can you answer Sarah Manasseh's question, which is, who is the artist of the Calcutta Jews paintings?
He's one of the Chitrakars of around Calcutta, and I'll give Sarah his name, and hopefully he can make something with music for her.
Sounds lovely.
Right, what is this, Brigadier?
Those guys always come up.
This was used by the British Army, the Indian soldiers who were in working in Iraq in the Second World War. And if you look, it's got something which is in Urdu, and the other side, this would be for people to say how they were. Pre-printed, and it's probably the kind of thing which General Jacobs people would have used. You can see the British Press, India Field Service from Iraq, and I get the other side.
Of course, there were a lot of Indian soldiers in Iraq, weren't there?
They were there also in the First World War too, and served in the campaign that was so disastrous for the British. That led to the creation of Mesopotamia to the state of Iraq, where they put the son of the Sheriff of Mecca in as the king of Iraq.
Yeah. So you're talking about the siege of Kut?
Good. General Townsend, yeah.
So that's the other side, the reverse of this postcard. So it's all pre-printed, and they could just pop it in the letterbox, and their parents or their family would know the good news.
India,
and they didn't even they didn't need to know how to write.
They just put their name and say they were saying.
Yeah.
They weren't allowed to say where they were or anything.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's good. Great. Okay. Anyone else wants to say something? Aviva Klein Frank, who is actually an expert on Yemen. Perhaps we can have that talk on the Himyarite kingdom.
Do you want to unmute yourself, please?
Can you unmute?
Oh, I wanted to ask you, I'm doing a research about Aden, South Yemen.
Yes.
Yes.
And it was the family Haskell mentioned here. They were in Aden, a big group of Jews from Bombay in Aden, and I think something like 30 families, and they were a big family of the Haskell. Do you know more people from the origin from Iraq and lived in Aden, in India, and served the British in Aden? Do you know from there are few from your family there too? They were also, do you know people?
Yes, I think that the importance of Aden in this whole thing is that we totally discount the importance and presence of Yemeni Jews. And if you go back in the history and you see things that were in the Cairo Geniza, all of these people went through Yemen. If you go to the 17th century in Cochin, you'll find the tomb of Nehemiah Moti, who was a Kabbalist and poet. People go and they venerate his tomb. I've seen Muslims, Christians lighting St. Mary's candles, Hindus. He was from Yemen. And we're just beginning to start to look at the Cochin and Kerala communities to see the number of people who came from Yemen, because this was not really somewhere we. And now we have somebody who's named Gamliel, she's a professor in Scotland, who is working on this. She's of Yemeni Jewish origin herself, and she is working on the contributions.
What's her name?
I'm blocking on her first name. It starts with an O. It's Gamliel.
Gabriel.
Where in Scotland? Where in Edinburgh?
I think in Glasgow, if I remember. And she just has a new book out about the early history of the Jews in South India. And
there were many Yemenites in India as teacher among the Jewish communities. Did you meet some?
Yeah, well, these we come across them all the time, and and you can find things. You can find some of the letters and things like that of the last Jews who were in Aden before they went to Israel and so on. But I think that this is a totally neglected area, the study of Yemeni Jews.
Yemeni Jews in India, but I'm talking about actually wanted to know about families from India working for the British in Aden until 1967.
I don't know that for sure, but I think I probably have some things related to that. I'd have to go and look.
I think there was B'nai Israel who came to work in Aden.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And he worked for the British. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Right.
From Israel.
Yeah. But no, from India too.
Yes.
I mean,
they came to Aden until the '67 war, which was
yes. Aden was under the British government from Bombay.
Yeah, it was part of the Bombay presidency earlier on, during the time of the British Raj.
Yes.
So getting a bit off topic here, actually.
Okay, I just wanted to know because I'm working about Aden Jews during the British rule years, and I came across of 300 from India working in Aden.
Right. Well, if anyone has any information, all they have to do is email me and I'll pass it on.
Could you put us in contact?
Yes,
with-
sure. Yeah.
Okay.
So Aviva, I think you're on our mailing list, so I'll put you in touch with Ken.
Thank
Okay,
you. That's very nice.
Okay.
But I
thank
think the amazing thing is, why is there not an Indian stamp yet for General Jacob? Because I think there should
Right.
be a
Very
stamp.
interesting. There should be
And,
one. There
I
should
think
be one.
now is the time to do that. But I think we have to see, you know, there has to be some sort of occasion.
Yeah, maybe 10 years since his death, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, the time that I had hoped to push it at the time of COVID, because it was the 50th anniversary of the Bangladesh War. But that has passed.
Yeah, but we'll have to find another occasion. Okay. Right.
Okay.
Well, on that note, we will close the meeting. I'm conscious that it's
Thank
very,
you so
very
much.
cold in India.
Yeah.
What is it now? It's it's 3 in the morning.
2:30 in the morning now, I
Yeah.
think.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Good night, Ajit.
Brigadier Apte, go to sleep. And thank him so much for that wonderful presentation. And thank you, Ken. I think together you put together a wonderful sort of overview of the man himself. And this is going to be a lasting tribute. I'm glad we've got it recorded. You know, it's a unique tribute, I think, to General Jacob.
Right.
So even if we don't get the stamp, the Indian stamp.
We've got 1 or 2 people who have to disclose their names, so I'm just going to put them in the back in the waiting room.
So I
before we
just
make it
I
open to
just
everyone.
want to alert everybody to our next event, which will be something completely different. We go from India to North Africa, specifically Algeria during the war, when there was an amazing resistance by a predominantly Jewish resistance to the Vichy regime in Algeria. In fact, Jews were amongst those who helped the Allies disembark in Algiers on the 8th of November 1942. And we're showing a film which hasn't been seen before called Shadows of Freedom. And there will be a discussion with the historian Haim Sadoun. In fact, we're doing this in conjunction with the Yad Ben-Zvi Institute. And
Okay.
here's the commercial break.
Yes. I
Yes.
think that should be an interesting talk, the one which we just put up there.
Okay, so this is the
push it
the
towards
Jewish heroes of
Cheers. Keep the
Operation
run.
Force. I saw Brigadier Apte was nodding, so obviously knows all about
We'd love
that.
to see you. We'd love to see you join us
Yeah.
again, Brigadier Apte.
Yeah, and we have another event concerning North Africa during World War II, and that's in May. Okay, so
Thank you very much.
no,
Thank you.
Thank you very much to
No.
all of you for joining us.
And now what we always do at the end, I've taken out anyone who called themselves iPhone or Mahatma Gandhi or other interesting names. I've taken them out the chat, and we now let everyone unmute themselves for any last personal thoughts they want to share. So everyone can now unmute themselves, and I will take the recording off.
Okay, so Holly, I think.
Hi, Lynn and Lawrence.